There's kids and adults with little toy stick horses doing that. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. A 2-day thing. They advertise it, and it's just like they're petting the stick horse. And there's even competing. They're trying to jump all these for time, and the girls are kicking their legs up like a horse. We are in it. We're in it. I'm just saying, you say, well, is this really important, Pastor, in dealing with all this? You're going to have to make some calls. You're going to have to make some decisions in the future. That's what the Rays are going to have to do. Now, see what happens over there. I guess you got this on now. I didn't say too much there, but once they get your passport and stamp it, you're out. You're out. You'll never come back. And that's what I'm afraid for our guy. I'm afraid for him that all those years of studying. Now, they can go other places. That race is everywhere around the world. I'll just put it like that. They could go to a lot of different places, but the need is where they're at. That's where they need to be. So I'm going to again call them tonight and see a little bit more on that. And I've said all along, I'd rather they just kind of get underground and do like a circuit rider and get 2 or 3 homes and bounce around, try to the best they can. So he told me years ago, though, he said he knew the days were numbered with all the technology that country has. So what we're looking at here in Ecclesiastes 8 is what we just started. We just got verse 1. And I just called it the wisdom. He's contemplating the wisdom of wisdom. And I said, if you don't understand, there's 2 wisdoms, the Bible said. There's a wisdom that comes from above, and there's a wisdom that comes from below. If you don't understand that can cause problems. And so what he's dealing with, he's trying to deal with problems in his life. And so he's talking about, I see weakness in wisdom, he says. Really, verse number 1, I'll just read it. Who is a wise man? He said, how can you tell who's wise? How do you know what you should obey and what you shouldn't obey? Should you wear a mask? Should you get another 17th vaccination shot? Should you obey? Should you capitulate? And what should they do over there? Should they go against law? Should they print Bibles? Should they not print Bibles? It may come down to us. Should we go to church or not? Should we have church or not under COVID? That was some literally were just being fined like, what was it, like $10,000 a day, some churches. He's dealing with, how do you deal with wisdom if I see wickedness in wisdom? He said there's 2 things. I just divided the chapter in half basically. He said the problem is you can't tell. He said because there's a weakness to wisdom. And then he said there's a wickedness even in wisdom. It depends on where it's coming from. Is it coming from God or from the devil? The devil's wise. The Bible said he's more subtle than any beast. But that's a wicked wisdom. And that he deals with that. Who is a wise man, he asked. Who knoweth the interpretation of it? Who can I trust? Who knows the answer to anything? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine. That's good and it's bad. And the boldness of his face shall be changed. He said, that my problem is you can't tell by looking at somebody. He said, somebody may be really, sound really good. They look really good. He said, but there could be wicked wisdom. There are people who are brazenly wicked, and they're very bold about it. And they're honestly, sometimes some people just shock me at how wicked they are and how brazen they are in it and how confident they are in it and how smart they are in it. You know, I know sometimes I've dealt with some ladies that I guess they call them Karens that to me, man, they're fast on their wisdom. Later on, you say, oh man, I should have said this. I should have said that. And it amazes me sometimes somebody who's got a wicked heart, how much wisdom the devil gives them. It just shocks you. And how people can lie and maneuver. And later on you think, oh man, I could have caught him in that lie. And I don't even try to think about that stuff. I don't have time to sit there. The Bible talks about evil inventions. I didn't give you all the verses. And God talks about, he hates it, how they devise evil upon their bed. How they'll lay at night and they'll try to figure out, how can I get money here? How can I rob somebody? How can I get that what I want there? And people will sit there and day and night. And God has, I didn't give you all the verses. The Bible has a multitude of verses on how people can be wicked and they are really skilled at it. So he's saying, who is wise? Who can I trust in dealing in life and in our dealings with government? are dealing with laws, are dealing with your business, the laws of the government. So really, that's kind of what we're going to hit on here today. He said wisdom. And what I put on verse number 1 was basically, do not look at the countenance, look for character. You cannot look at the countenance. Well, that guy really looks good. They really are smart on this, and they may be smart, but it could be a wicked smart. And somebody might know finances. And again, you got to be careful is what he's saying. Who really knows the answer to a thing? He said, as he's looking at life, he said, there are some people that are wise and they're really bold in it, but it's a wickedness. So he says, because of that, he said, if that's the case, then he gives a little bit, look at verse number 2. He says, because of that, he says, there are some things you better do. I'm going to look at my notes here because I was hoping I'd read a little bit of those verses from last week. But anyway, I'll go ahead and verse number 2. Verse 2, he says, I counsel thee. So, okay, if you can't tell, and you cannot see somebody's spirituality. So I've had people, I've preached this, and I've used the Bible, and I had a guy coming up and say, I still think I can tell. And I'm thinking, you're ignorant. The best example I have is Samuel, like last week. Samuel would talk with God. You talk about a guy who should know people and God. I mean, God literally would talk to Samuel. He started talking to him when he was a 12-year-old boy, or a 3-year-old boy. It's Samuel, this guy. As God would talk to Samuel. But Samuel could not tell by looking at somebody whether they had a heart for God or they were wicked. See, how do you know? Because he didn't. He came to Jesse's boys, and he saw Eliab and said, surely this is the Lord's anointed. You know why? Because he looked good. And it tells me, even though this was a preacher, a man of God that could literally talk with God, he was deceived. He was tricked. Because God said, I've rejected him. Because he had a wicked heart. I said, he is the very one that said to David, I know thine heart, the naughtiness of the heart. He was deceived. He looked at David and said, you got a wicked heart. No, he had a wicked heart, God said. God said, I've rejected him. And Samuel looked at his countenance, said, he's the man. And that's exactly what we're doing probably for the next president of the United States. They're going to elect somebody that has nothing to do with their content, nothing to do with their plan, nothing to do with their character, but their appearance, their race, and their gender. And people know nothing, and we're going to give the most power of the world. You talk about insanity. The world is going to give the power of the world to somebody that we don't even know who they are. We don't even know what they are. But they're looking at the countenance. I'm saying, but don't be fools. Say, well, I won't. I'm not doing that. Be careful. And you cannot tell. You cannot tell if I'm spiritual today. Some people will say all the time, but that preacher, I just love his preaching. So what? He might be demon possessed for all you know. How do you know? What's his character? What character is what's going to come out in time is what I'm saying. Character is what you really are and what will come out in the long run. Not the wisdom you have right now. This guy, man, he's a great preacher, or this person is such a good Christian. You don't know that. You don't put your faith in humans. See, there's something about humans. We want to trust another human. It's idolatry. We want to trust another human. And the Bible says that there's none good, no, not one. They're all gone out of the way. The poison of asp is under their tongues. Out of their mouth, he said, they're an open sepulcher. They're full of dead men's bones, like a rotten carcass. And so again, that's why I preached down there at Albuquerque, where the Bible says, cease ye from man. For what he said, what is he? His breath's in his nostril. God said, why are you going to trust a human being? How's a human being going to help you when the economy collapses? How's a human being going to help somebody get through survive the tribulation? How's a human going to do that? You can't even help yourself. So he said, because of that, okay, he's going to give us some counsel, some advice on then some decisions on how to live in a wicked world. In a world where there's wisdom, but it might be wicked, it might be weak. He said, I counsel thee to keep king's commandment, and that in regard to the oath of God. So he said, because of verse number 1, you can't know who's wise. He said, okay, my first bit of advice, how do we get through this? How do I job and I'm dealing with wicked people and people have robbed me or deceived me or I've been betrayed or whatever. how am I going to get through this? He said, try to obey the laws the best you can then. Try to obey authority is what he's saying. Now, again, he's going to go through some thinking here. He said, I advise you keep or guard, hedge about the king's commandment as if it's God, is what he says, as best you can. Now, I'm going to give you a bunch of verses on that because I've had people that don't like that. And they'll say, well, I don't believe that. Well, you're going to have a hard time if I can get through a lot of these verses here today, fighting with God on that. Turn over very quickly. I'm going to give you a bunch of verses on it. What the Bible teaches, it is a fine balance then. It's a fine balance. Look at Daniel 6. Man, he was an expert. I want you to see this. Look at some of these verses here. Write them down. Daniel was an expert at it. Daniel was an expert at obeying God and obeying man, even to his detriment. And again, if you think about it, Daniel's life was ruined by these guys. Daniel actually served under 8 kings. Now, the Bible only gives about, Nebuchadnezzar, and then Belshazzar, and Darius and Cyrus has 4. But in history, there's 9. Now, you think about that. This guy, he's a Jew. His life's been ruined by these guys. I remind you again, he was a child of royalty, okay? I've told you this. If you do your math, you can figure it out. He could have been the son of Josiah, who brought revival back, and God said, I'll not judge the land of Israel till your sons are dead. And he had 3 sons. They were all wicked. And potentially, I just know how God works. Wouldn't it have been something if Daniel would have been a 3-month-old baby? But wouldn't it have been something if he could have been Josiah's son and would have, should have, could have been the next king of Israel and taken him right on into the millennium? He could have. I think he probably could have. I know this, he was royalty. I know that. Because they said, take the children of the kings, the children of the palace, and they were made eunuchs. So, and that was a horrible thing. And it wasn't just, again, I'm not trying to be graphic, but again, I don't want you to lie to me either. If something's horrible, then don't. And without God, without Christ, men become animals, and don't lie to me about that. I said I had a teacher in school, pretty famous guy, Victor Sears, used to be the president of the BBF, and I remember him telling us he would go to the Chicago Museum. I've been to the Chicago Museum a number of times, and I remember him saying that the head of the museum was friends with him. And he said, you want to see some unusual stuff? And they had a special to people. You know, you can go to Pompeii, and when they first uncovered Pompeii, they revealed such wickedness. The guy that uncovered it, listen, this is what happened. When they uncovered Pompeii and they saw those people frozen, remember the ash dust and drawings, the paintings and everything, all the items they had, when they started uncovering that, the guy who discovered it and found it, he said, this is so wicked, bury it. He reburied it. But you know what they do today? Now they have tours for it. They have tours to show people that stuff. I'm just saying, don't lie to me. I'm not saying the tours are a good thing. I'm just saying, don't lie to me in history. When there was cultures that didn't have Christ, they became animals. And we would become animals, is what I'm saying. And when they take those boys, I'm just going to say it. I told you, most of you have heard this. They'd take them down to Jericho, and that's where they'd get them everybody ready, chained up, rods in their body, lock them up, strip them down, abuse them, whatever they're going to do. They did it at Jericho, and then they'd start the long march to Babylon. And that's where they made them eunuchs, and what they would do is they'd just remove everything. And if they didn't bleed to death, then they marched them on as a boy. And so what did they do? I'm not trying to be graphic, but they would just use rags. And so they would smell. Can you imagine? I'm talking about Daniel. He was a eunuch. He was constantly 5 times in the chapter 1. He was with the prince of the eunuchs, the prince of the eunuchs, the prince that he was over Daniel and his 3 buddies. So it wasn't all him in palace robes and all glorious. And these guys ruined his life. So I think he was a little bit bitter. If he especially could have said, I could have been the king of Israel. I was royalty. Now I'm not even going to be able to have children. I'm not going to have a wife. Nobody's going to want me. I have nothing to live for. He didn't live that way. Look at Daniel chapter 6. Daniel 6, it says in verse number 10, Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and windows being opened, and the king prayed and gave thanks for his God as he did time. Then these men, anywhere you have to pray them. But 3 times a day he would stop, travel to his house, wherever that was. Bible doesn't say he'd open the windows to show off. It says the windows being opened. He kneeled on his knee. Do it. If it hair lips the devil, I'm going to do it. Did he not know they're going to come? Yeah, he did. And did he not know you're going to be thrown in? Yeah, he did. But he broke that law. But I want you to notice something. It says there that in verse number 28, so this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Somehow Daniel had figured out that fine balance of how to obey and yet not to obey. Look at verse 21. When he talks to the king, then said Daniel, O king, and I told you this years ago, my son brought this one out, O king, live forever. Now you're talking to your enemy. You're talking to the guy that you should be more bitter of, that wrecked your life. So I know people have done me wrong, and I'm bitter against him. Why wasn't he? You think he's lying? The only way Darius could live forever is if he got saved, right? So Daniel was doing his best to try to get these guys saved. And he did Nebuchadnezzar. Look back. I'll see if I can find it here real quick. See if I can find it. Look back here. I want to find chapter 4 real quick. Nebuchadnezzar. My point is, he still showed respect. I'm not going to get very far because I do have to finish on time today. But he showed respect to the guy that messed his whole life up. And he not only showed him respect, he showed him compassion. Again, why would you this would be like a Jew. It'd be like a Jew that is skin and bones in Auschwitz, and the Nazis have killed your wife and killed your children, and here comes one of the leaders, here comes Hitler or one of his henchmen, and you say, I'm praying for you, brother. I pray you'll get saved and live with Jesus forever. I'd want to pray. I pray God will strike you dead right now. Wouldn't you? If that happened to you? Not Daniel. He says to Nebuchadnezzar, look at verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was astonished. That means, we say astonished. It means to become. It's not a archaic word, because this is the King James' most read book in the Bible or the world. So how in the world could it be archaic when it's in more in books printed and read in the world? It means to become like a stone. Okay, he literally, when he saw what was going to happen, he froze up. When we say astonished, it means he's thinking. He was astonished for 1 hour. This guy's into this. This guy's emotionally involved. This guy's concerned. He just sees a dream where the guy that's wrecked his life is going to go nuts for 7 years and lose his kingdom. Azar, let not the dream of the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Now, I might have been a little bit afraid to say what I was going to say. He might have been a little bit scared. How am I going to word this? Belshazzar answered and said, my Lord, the dream be to them that hate thee. I don't. He said, this dream, I'm going to tell you, this is for people who hate you. I don't. It's for people who hate you. And the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. I'm not your enemy. And before it's done, chapter 4, Daniel chapter 4, again, is the only chapter I know in the Bible written by a brand new believer. Look at chapter 4, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king unto all people, nations. This is Nebuchadnezzar's writing. This is Nebuchadnezzar talking, chapter 4. He is telling his testimony. And because Daniel showed respect to him, look at verse 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, he is personally telling you, I became a believer in the God of the Scriptures, the God of the Jews, and all the promises, the messianic promises, the seed and everything. He said, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. That's Jesus. All whose works are truth and his ways judgment. and whose walk in pride he is able to base. My point is, Daniel saw the bigger picture. Now, I'm not there. So, well, boy, preacher, I'm kind of getting there. I'm not. Man alive, this is amazing, Daniel. O king, he tells Darius, I pray God to let your kingdom go on forever. He's enslaved the Jews. They're all slaves over there. I pray your kingdom will go on and on and on if you get saved. Now, Cyrus came along. He did get saved. Cyrus was a Gentile. God called him my servant. I don't think there's another Gentile referred that way, and that is the word Mashiach, the Messiah. The word Messiah doesn't just mean Jesus. It means the anointed one for a special purpose. And God called Cyrus. That's why they made a coin over Trump when he allowed Israel, an independent country, to say, we want Jerusalem as our capital. And every president since about, probably Bush Sr. said, we'll let them do it. But they never did, but Trump did. And so they made a coin with Trump's face on one side and Cyrus the Great on the other. The Jews did. They're referring to your Bible. They know that. Cyrus allowed them to go back and rebuild the temple. And guess who got Cyrus saved? Daniel did. My point is, somehow Daniel hit it right. Look at Daniel 3. I'm just going to give you a few and I'm not telling you. I'm just saying it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, I think, before we get out of this thing to figure out how we're going to deal with the laws of man when they get more wicked and wicked and wicked. I mean, what are you going to do? And somebody in your work says, you call me they, or I'm going to get you for gender, whatever, dysphoria, whatever. I don't know what they would call it, for hate crime. Unless you call me they. Unless you call Steve. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? We're almost there. We're almost there. How fast this all came about. How fast it happened. You don't think it can do that again and do it another 20 ridiculous laws, from legalizing homosexuality to now legalizing that if you're a Christian, it's a hate crime? You don't think that could happen? Well, that's what they've always thought. Daniel, somehow the 3 Hebrew boys learned, I think, from their friend. Look at Daniel 3, verse 16. I like this one. It says, the king said to them, verse 15, now if you be ready. At what time? He said, last chance, boys. You either knuckle on this or you're going to burn. You be ready that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, harp, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God who shall deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O King Nebuchadnezzar. They're not mad. They're not disrespectful. Again, Daniel said, O king, I wish I didn't have to tell you this. This is a horrible thing that's going to happen to you, and I wish I didn't have to tell you. This is a dream this is the same guy, Nebuchadnezzar. I wish this dream had never happened to you, because it's for people who hate you. It's for people who are your enemies. I'm not. Darius, O king, live forever. And Daniel influenced. I'm just going to read him because I thought that was fascinating. Nebuchadnezzar. Then he had his son. His name was Evil Merodach. That's in your Bible. Can you imagine that? What kind of a guy is that? How'd you like to elect somebody as president of the United States called Evil Merodach, the evil pagan god? That's evil Marduk, evil Baal. Not just Baal, now the wicked part of Baal. He named his son Wicked Baal. That's Nebuchadnezzar's son. Nerijalasar, that's how this is pronounced. He was a relative. Then Labasi Marduk, however you pronounce that. Then Nabonidus, you maybe heard of him. Belshazzar, Darius, Cyrus. Those 8 kings. He had to rule under 8 pagan kings. And each time I said he started at the bottom, and somehow God bless him, he'd end up running the thing because he had God's wisdom, but he was constantly attacked by wicked wisdom. So how did he do it? How did they do it? They said, he said, who's the God that could deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, O King Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. That means they were being respectful. We're not being mouthy. We've thought this through, is what they're saying. They're saying we've already made our choice. We've already thought this through. These are young men, and a young man ought to be helped and taught what to believe. I don't see people. I have people still come to me in churches where they'll come and say, why is drinking wrong? Does the Bible really condemn alcoholic drinking? Why would going to a dance be wrong? I told you, I've had my kids have preachers' kids come to us and say, my dad never taught us that. My dad never taught us why that was wrong. He'd preach, and I'm thinking of a guy, pretty well-known, big church, and his daughters would come to my daughter and said, he never sat down and talked to us. I'm asking you, dads, do you teach your kids? I don't understand people today. They're not teaching their kids how to stand. They're not teaching what's right and wrong. These boys, somebody had spent the time teaching them, that's wrong. And they said, we've already made our decision. That's why Daniel, as a boy, as a child, the Bible said Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's meat. I already made a choice. If it costs me my life, I'm not drinking that booze. I'm not eating that pagan stuff. That's a sign. They'll think I'm a pagan. Bible doesn't forbid me. Paul said you can go ahead and eat it. He said, I know, but flee the appearance of evil, Paul said. I'm not going to, if it kills you, but there's not a Bible command against it. That's what everybody said. Well, what's wrong with it? Where's the Bible condemn it? I said, I like this guy. I think it's funny. Can you imagine if God listed like, thou shalt not smoke Camel cigarettes? I've told you this often. Can you imagine if that was in the Bible? And this was before Camel cigarettes. It's like smoking a Camel. How do you smoke a camel? Do you light his tail on fire and he breathes out his mouth? You breathe that smoke. How do you light it? Why would you smoke a camel? God gives you principles, and He expects you to have wisdom and some brains. But if nobody teaches them, they're not going to know. You ought to set your kids down, and you ought to go through everything that pops in your head. Why is it wrong do you wear a dress that's so tight you're going to explode in it? Why is that wrong? You say, well, women ought to know. They don't know. Your kids won't know. Why do we not cut our hair like that? Why do we not dress like that? If you don't teach them from the Bible, who's going to get it done? I can get up here once in a while and hit on it, but you got them every day. You got them all day. You got them their entire life. Have you sat there and taught your kids these things? Here's what they said. We're not careful to answer. We've already made a choice. Look at this. If it so be our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O King. They're still being respectful. They're acknowledging you can burn us, O King. King, you got the authority, but I love this. But if not, oh, I love this. That tells me, folks, they had faith in God, but it's kind of like the guy that comes to Jesus in Mark, I think it's 9, and he comes to Jesus and he cries out, Lord, help me. And my son's grievously vexed of a devil. And every time we pass the fire and water, the demon throws him in to kill him. And Jesus said, do you believe? And I love the answer. He said, Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief. I love that. I've prayed that many a time. How about you? I've prayed those words. God, I believe you on this. Help me in my unbelief. Because we have faith 1 second, and then I don't know. God, you're going to deliver me on this. You're going to help me on this. You're going to help me through this. God, deliver me. Oh, I believe He will. Oh, I don't know if He's going to. That's what they said. We believe God can and He will. But if He doesn't, I love this. If not, be it known unto thee. That's very brazen, but it's not. It's bold, I should say. I should say maybe it's bold, but not brazen. Be it known unto thee, O King, that we will not serve thy gods nor worship the golden images thou set up. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed. Boy, it was changed. He was changed to an animal, eating grass like an ox before it's done. I'm just telling you, and I'm going to stop here. I got a ton of verses we're going to look at on this, Lord willing, next week. But as much as possible, you ought to try to obey the laws. I don't like, I've said this. I'm not trying to be a troublemaking rabble rouser, but paper money's illegal. It's illegal according to our Constitution. Our Constitution says coinage is nothing but gold and silver. And so definitely, if paper money is not real money, is illegal, piece of plastic's illegal according to our Constitution. I'm just telling you, it's illegal according to our Constitution. So therefore, I don't have to pay taxes. Yeah, you do. Jesus did. We're going to look at some of that. We're going to look at what Paul said about it, Peter said about it, Nehemiah said about it, and what even Jesus said about it. He dealt with these very things. Now think about it. Think of all the men and women in the Bible. They lived under oppressive societies, worse than ours. So no wonder. I'm going to give you a list of them. I didn't know, honestly, until I studied this out and started looking, I didn't realize how many passages, Old and New Testament, deal with this very subject right there. And I thought, well, it's common sense. They're living under pagan rule. They're living under wicked rulers, terrible rulers. They're living under terrible oppressive societies. How did they do it? You and I may have to find out. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father, we love you today and help us today, Lord, to live in such a way that our light